Picture the Viking you already have in your head. Enormous, filthy, horned helmet, matted hair, charging off a longship to burn something down. Now set that image aside, because the archaeology tells a completely different story. Archaeologists digging Viking-age graves across Scandinavia, Britain, Russia, and Iceland have found a consistent pattern. Combs appear in graves more frequently than almost any other object. More frequently than weapons, more frequently than jewelry, more frequently than tools. A comb was buried with the dead so reliably that researchers now treat its presence as a standard marker of Norse identity across the entire Viking diaspora. The dirty, unwashed raider image was not built from evidence. It was built from fear, from misunderstanding, and from the accounts of people who had every reason to make their enemies sound as monstrous as possible. Strip away the mythology, and what you find is a culture that was, by the standards of its time, unusually preoccupied with cleanliness. Let's start with the combs themselves. Most Viking combs were made from red deer antler. Antler has a specific property that made it ideal. It can be cut thin, worked into fine teeth, and polished to a smooth surface without cracking. It also has a slight natural oil content that conditions hair as it passes through. Some combs were made from bone, from whalebone, or occasionally from imported ivory. The craftsmanship was not utilitarian. Viking combs were carved, decorated, and finished with care. Many feature geometric patterns along the spine. Some were enclosed in matching antler cases, carved to the same dimensions as the comb itself. These were not objects thrown together for practicality. They were objects people chose to be buried with. The comb cases themselves tell you something. They protected the comb from damage in daily use. A person who didn't care about their comb would not have carried a case for it. And Viking combs were carried everywhere. They appear not just in graves, but in settlement sites, in ship burials, in trading posts, along every route the Norse traveled. They have been found in Hedeby in Denmark, in Jorvik in England, in Novgorod in Russia, along the Volga trade routes all the way to the Caspian Sea. The comb traveled with its owner the way a phone travels with its owner today. It was always there. But the comb was only one part of a much larger grooming practice. Viking-age archaeology consistently turns up tweezers, ear spoons, razors, and small picks, all made from iron or copper alloy, all clearly designed for personal grooming. Ear spoons removed wax, tweezers managed hair, razors maintained beards and heads, picks cleaned under fingernails. At excavations in Jorvik, the Viking-age city beneath modern York, archaeologists found entire grooming kits preserved together, suggesting these items were stored and carried as a set, not used and discarded separately. This was not casual hygiene. This was a system. The Old Norse word for Saturday is laugardagur. It translates directly as washing day. Saturday was the designated day for bathing in Norse culture, a practice regular enough to name a day of the week after it. Across medieval Europe, weekly bathing was actually unusual. The stereotype of the filthy medieval peasant has been somewhat exaggerated by historians, but organized weekly bathing tied to a named day was not common. The Norse made it a cultural institution. Steam bathing was also practiced across Scandinavia. Archaeological evidence for sauna-like bathing structures has been found at Norse settlement sites in Iceland and Norway. Heat, steam, and water were used together as part of routine cleansing. The Norse also used soap. Excavations have found evidence of soap production using animal fat and ash lye, the same basic chemistry used in soap making today. There is also written evidence. In 922 AD, an Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan traveled through Eastern Europe and encountered a group of Norse traders and warriors known as the Rus. He kept a detailed journal of everything he observed. Ibn Fadlan was not impressed by everything he saw. He describes the Rus bathing communally from a single bowl of water that was passed from person to person, which struck him as deeply unhygienic by his own standards. But even in his account, critical as it is, the Rus are bathing. They are combing their hair. They are taking care of their appearance. Ibn Fadlan's critique was about method, not about absence of hygiene. The comparison he was making was between Norse communal bathing and his own culture's individual washing. Both groups were washing. They simply disagreed on technique. Now here is where the story gets interesting. The dirty Viking image did not come from the medieval period at all. It came from the 19th century. The horned helmet that every Viking costume features is not historical. It was popularized by a costume designer named Carl Emil Doppler for a production of Richard Wagner's opera cycle, The Ring of the Nibelung, in 1876. Before that production, almost no one imagined Viking helmets with horns. After it, almost everyone did. The Romantic nationalist movements of the 19th century needed a particular image of the Germanic and Norse past, one that emphasized raw power, primitive ferocity, and untamed nature. Cleanliness did not fit that image. A warrior who combed his hair carefully before battle was less useful as a symbol than one who hadn't noticed the blood on his face. So the grooming evidence was overlooked, and the feral Viking became fixed in popular imagination. The Anglo-Saxons, who actually lived alongside Norse settlers in England for generations, recorded a very different complaint. Not that the Vikings were disgusting, but that they bathed too often, combed their hair too carefully, and changed their clothes too frequently. According to a 12th century chronicler named John of Wallingford, Norse settlers in England were considered dangerously attractive to Anglo-Saxon women, specifically because of their cleanliness and careful grooming. The Anglo-Saxon men were annoyed. The Vikings were stealing their partners not through violence, but through personal hygiene. That is not the version that made it into popular culture. Viking hair and beard styles were also not random. They were deliberate, meaningful, and varied by region and period. Sagas describe men known by their hairstyles. The saga hero Gunnar of Hlíðarenda was noted for his beautiful hair as much as his fighting ability. Some braided their beards, some shaved the back of their heads, some bleached their hair with a strong lye soap. Archaeological finds in Denmark have revealed preserved hair styled with what appears to be a plant-based gel. Appearance communicated status. It communicated identity. A well-groomed Viking warrior was not making an aesthetic choice. He was making a statement about who he was and where he stood in a highly structured social world. The comb, then, was not just a grooming tool. It was an object that carried social meaning. To carry one was to declare that you maintained yourself, that you were civilized, in the specific way that Norse culture understood that word. The graves where combs are found most elaborately presented, carved cases, decorated spines, placed beside the body with deliberate care, are often the graves of people with other markers of high status. The comb traveled with you in life and followed you into death. And the image that replaced all of this, the grunting, matted, horn-helmeted berserker charging through history, was built not from what the Norse left behind, but from what 19th century Europeans needed them to have been. The archaeology disagreed from the beginning. The combs were always there. The grooming kits were always there. The laugardagur was always there. The Norse carried their evidence of civilization with them across every sea they crossed, and buried it with their dead, so we could find it 1,000 years later. It just took a long time for anyone to listen.